Welcome back to the channel. Today, the last of the Forlorn Hope songs, Vive l'Empereur. So I don't speak French, and I don't know if I pronounce that properly, but I don't care. They lost these wars, so I don't have to worry about what they say. This is the last song on their album that I've got around to doing. I don't know what order it is in the actual album itself. Vive l'Empereur is about Napoleon and his rise to power, and sort of generally about that sort of thing. So let's take a listen. I have my own opinions about Napoleon, which I'm going to talk about. I'm not a big fan. Classic lead-in. All the songs seem to have a lead-in. And I don't know anything about music, so I can't comment on the actual music itself. Fair warning. And I ramble and go on tangents. The music is really good, actually. That's the only comment. People always forget this, and I shouldn't say always, but people often forget this, that Napoleon doesn't come from nowhere. He comes from the French Revolution. So the French Revolution happens, and within a decade of liberty, fraternity, equality, all that sort of nonsense, you have the mass purges, which of course is completely part of liberty, fraternity, equality, is when you start randomly executing people for no reason. What happened there? Chaos happens. A bunch of rebellions happen because of course they're going to happen. Foreign armies invade because of course they're going to happen. Chaos, and then Napoleon ends up rising to power during one of these coups by the royalists. France is in chaos, and then a strong figure emerges, like any dictator ever emerges from any failed revolution like that. It's the classic example. We have a revolution for the people, and a dictator is now in power who is oppressing the people. And we go, how did this happen? And we look around and we're like, oh, because we caused a bunch of chaos, and somebody had to come in and stop us, or whatever. Maybe that's not completely correct, but that's what happened in Napoleon's case. He maneuvers himself politically to become first consul, has a disastrous campaign in Egypt where he basically loses a French army and a major French general, not a major general, a major French general. What was his name? I've spaced on it now. I'll put it down the bottom. He was a very important French general, who then he refuses to let his body land back in France because he's petty. He then crowns himself emperor. He gets the Pope to come and then takes the crown and crowns himself. But it all comes from the French Revolution. So you go from liberty, equality, fraternity to a emperor who starts a decades-long plus series of wars that kills 2 million people, of your own people, let alone the rest of Europe, impoverishes most of Europe, causes people to flee from their homes, burns down a bunch of stuff, destroys the Holy Roman Empire, and allows the Austrian Empire to emerge from that. Sets up a stronger Prussia, destroys Poland, even though it's meant to be supporting Poland, they actually ends up destroying it because of the treaty afterwards. It all comes from the French Revolution. Artilleryman. Napoleon was from Corsica, which is an island in the Mediterranean there that the French had taken control of a couple of years before his birth, some time. He trained to be an artilleryman in the artillery officer school, which he succeeded in, and then got himself into the military once this chaos starts. Well, he's in the military and then the chaos starts, which he can jump ranks pretty quickly. I would like to point out Napoleon swore an oath to his king, which he then betrayed for his own personal greed, but then again, so did many other officers. Yes, Napoleon, not a good dude. I like the "Make His Country Great Again." That's a nice little put in there. Remember, this album came out during the Trump presidency, so that's sort of why that comes in there. I thought that was quite funny. And then, of course, burning the continent. Napoleon did. A decade of war, at least, depending on when you think the Napoleonic Wars started. But definitely from 1805 onwards, that's pure Napoleonic War territory. Battle of Austerlitz, many campaigns, destruction of Spain. Spain loses all of its foreign provinces as well, as a part of that revolution because the government's so weak. Portugal loses some as well. Brazil and Chile go independent. It's disastrous. It's pretty disastrous. It's so disastrous that for the next 100 years, we have what's called the Pax Europa, which I think is nonsense, and we shouldn't call it that, because the Pax Europa just means the time between one massive giant European war and the other massive giant European war. It ignores the sort of smaller wars between major powers like Prussia and Austria, or Prussia and France, and the other ones like Prussia and Denmark. Russia and Ottoman Empire go at it a couple of times. Britain and Russia go at one another. Everybody teams up against China. Like Europe was still completely at war. The British were in India, fighting in India. So it was European power fighting overseas. Warfare didn't stop by any means, especially when you talk about Franco-Prussian wars. Italy was completely on fire for decades, with the Risorgimento ending in the destruction of Rome, or the sacking of Rome, and then the Pope having to flee, and then all that sort of stuff going on, which I think gets solved in the 1920s. Europe was not at peace, so it's not all Napoleon's fault, but I don't like the Pax Europa myth that we've come up with. Anyway, I told you I ramble and I go on tangents. It would be kind of like saying, Eastern Europe is at peace now because there's not a major war going on between two major powers, even though the Ukraine thing is going on. It's sort of like, is it really at peace? Because there is this kind of major conflict happening right now. Yes, but it's not big enough, so it doesn't count. So I think it counts. Starting in 1803. No, I'm just kidding. Napoleon is kind of this weird figure that just kind of emerges from nowhere. He's just some guy from Corsica who politically maneuvers himself to take over the French government. That's pretty incredible. That's actually quite amazing. He raises marshals from the ranks. He doesn't really do that, but there are marshals who were once from the ranks. He had that famous saying, in every private knapsack is a marshal's baton, or something like that. Fun fact, all Russian field marshals started off as privates, because there was a rule in Russia, because it was so backwards, that if you wanted to be an officer in the Russian army, you had to start as a private. So what they would do is when you were born, they would register you in the military as a private in a regiment somewhere. And by the time you turned 16, you would be promoted into a lieutenancy. So every single Russian field marshal was technically a private. And there would be a field marshal for the British. There's only one ever for the British who started out as a private. I wish I could remember his name. He didn't fight in any particular way. He didn't lead men in any regimental... Well, I don't think he ever led a regiment at all. He was a staff officer mostly in the First World War. He was an engineer of some sorts and a mountain person. Anyway, not important. But people like Marshal Ney and that sort of thing were quite important. Marmont, Ney, Soult, Grouchy, the famous Grouchy. Napoleon wanted his men back at Waterloo. The marshals were quite important because of the corps system, where European armies didn't use corps. They just used divisions. And the American army wouldn't use corps until American Civil War. And even then, they were sort of, at the start, they were saying, this division thing kind of works. We really want to mess with it. Corps are basically, for the French, but sort of centralized power in one person at a smaller level, so you can coordinate different corps, and corps can move faster and come to one another's aid. Instead of moving a giant army around, you can move smaller corps. It's a French thing that everyone else kind of adopted once the numbers of troops you were commanding got big enough. The army groups, and that evolved in World War II. World War One, maybe before that. So the Eagles Will Fly is pretty self-explanatory because of the Eagle standard. If you see a nation or a person using eagles as their symbol, except for America, they're different. It's to try and gain legitimacy from Rome. Roman eagle's symbol being the symbol of the emperors in Rome. So you'll see the Serbians have it, the Austrians have the double-headed eagle, the Russians have the eagle, the French, Imperial French have the eagle. If you see eagles in Europe, it means I'm Rome and you should treat me like Rome. It means I'm the successor of Rome that everyone's been fighting over. In America, it's because the national bird is the bald eagle. That's sort of different. Although you could say coincidental. But yes, in Europe, if you see eagles, it means I'm imperial and you should treat me like an emperor. It's sort of a legitimacy thing. Opposed me and died. Napoleon was insanely cruel. He had people bayoneted to death in Africa, as or in Egypt, who had surrendered to him. He was petty. He unloaded cannons into a village for no reason other than he had to use the ammunition. He was very, very petty. Incredibly petty and borderline genocidal at some parts. Marching troops into the middle of winter with no real protections. Just evil. Just ambitious beyond anything. And completely irrational in some parts. Some things you see him do are like, that's insane. He had irrational phobias. He was afraid of anybody named Smith. Because of Sir Sidney Smith, what he did to him at one of these sieges. He burned half the French fleet, and sort of Napoleon took that very personally. And anyway, he had these weird, superstitious things. He got beaten by rabbits in one battle when they tried to do a hunt, and the rabbits turned on him. He was very strange, and sort of like he was quite crazy. He's quite crazy on a lot of things. But yeah, you didn't want to oppose him because you'd be in big trouble. And a lot of his family ends up betraying him towards the end of the Napoleonic Wars anyway, once he goes into exile. But that's too rambly for now. Ironically, the only army that never suffered a serious setback was the British. You could also argue the Americans, but the Americans were kind of on Napoleon's side in that they were fighting the same enemies as him. But the British were the only army never to suffer a serious setback by the French. Although the retreat to Corunna comes close, but it wasn't a complete disaster. You don't really need me to explain this, but obviously the column is the French unit of choice. The colonne d'attaque, which is different to a marching column. A column of attack is sort of wider and squatter, as a marching column is sort of spread out. So if the French get attacked in a marching column, it's just like anybody else getting attacked. They're not better at it or anything. A column of attack was it was almost a psychological thing for yourself too, because you have an army of conscripts compared to the British army of volunteers. How do you get conscripts to advance? You make it so that they can't do anything other than advance. You box them in with a bunch of guys. You can't go anywhere, so you might as well go forward. Similar to Austrians had similar things, not as sophisticated. I read an Austrian manual where their defense against cavalry was simply to have all the men on the outside turn their muskets outwards, and just, instead of having a hollow square, just make a solid one. Which, I mean, obviously worked for them. So yes, the column and the eagles weren't gold. They were gilded in gold. One British regiment took an eagle and then chopped it up thinking it was solid gold, and wanted to sell it. Then they realized it was just sort of metal underneath. And it would have been better for them to have just handed it in and gotten the prize money. But anyway, you live and learn, as they say. The pas de charge thing in sharp practice, one of the rules is pas de charge, which is you can do with your French, where you can charge further. It's one of the classic musical accompaniments of the Napoleonic Wars, and of course all different units would have different music, but the French would have that as their sort of charge forward thing, similar to Highlanders. Each Highland regiment would have their own marching bagpipe songs, clan specific normally. You march the Cameron men for the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders, 79th, I think. So you'd have your own music, that sort of stuff. And the pas de charge was the sort of, when you heard that, you know you were going in. So it was sort of the morale boosting song. The French did actually win. I know we often focus on the Peninsular War because of Anglo sort of stuff, but in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe, the French were winning all the time. These tactics worked phenomenally well against the Prussians and Austrians, or the small Germanic states. Against the Russians, these things worked. I mean, the French lost the Russian campaign because the Russians burned everything down and kept running before they had to get turned around. I mean, the French were incredibly successful. Just the British beat them in Spain and then marched through. And of course, the other European powers turned them around as well. But sometimes we have this bias of saying, well, the French seem to have conquered all of Europe, but they sucked. And really, they were a pretty fierce force to be reckoned with. I'd like to point this out just because I pointed out in The Patriot. Notice how the guys on the right side of the screen have green cuffs and collars, and you see a green flag behind them, and the guys on the left have yellow cuffs and collars with a yellow flag behind them. That's how it's supposed to be done. This artist has done a good job, and you can see it's obviously the sort of two battalions together, so that's why there's a guy with yellow and green over here. I think this is a famous sergeant who I've done a video on in Eagle Hunter. Eagle Hunters is the sergeant who took the French Eagle. But yeah, that's how you're supposed to have regimental colours, battalion colours and regimental colours. Done for the British, at least. Also, you notice the difference of the stovepipe and Belgic shakos. Stovepipe shakos are the flat ones on top with the little pom-pom. Belgic have them on the side there. Both were in use at the same time in Spain. 1812 was generally when they started to come in. At the same time, the Portuguese were going from a Belgic to a stovepipe. Just a bit of fun. This is an awesome chorus thing here. It's a perfectly nice guitar solo. It just repeats from there, so I'll end it here. Just to note, when he says, my eagles will fly, normally the eagles wouldn't have a flag on them. Flags would be left in depot. So you wouldn't carry them on campaign usually, although sometimes you could. But generally you just have an eagle, whereas the British would have the actual flags. Anyway, that's Vive l'Empereur. This one's sort of more just a general Napoleonic song. I won't go on my rant about the Vendée, which I did in the first recording, because I stuffed the recording up. But anyway, I'll save that for another day. So thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day. If you like the series, check out the Forlorn Hope. And if you want me to look at any other songs, pop them down below. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day.